that argue that it is the people through their vote that
That is a great question, John, and it's a really interesting one because as I've traveled around the state the last month or so, it's one that I've gotten such disagreement from, even among conservative, Republican, and Tea Party groups. And I used to be one of those who said precisely what you said. You know what? It's up to the people. If they love somebody and they want to keep him or her there, if they want Chuck Schumer for 40 years, who are we to say they can't do that? Decide at the ballot box. However, I have actually changed my mind about this. I think that the biggest problem we have right now is this permanent, entrenched ruling class in Washington. And for a variety of reasons, many, many reasons, starting with poor public education in this country and the fact that we have citizens who are not being educated in civics, for the reasons that our campaign finance laws are basically a huge incumbent protection act designed to keep people in power who are there. There are a whole lot of reasons we've got this. I think a way to break the logjam is to enact term limits. Now, we can always reverse them later once the logjam's broken and we go back to a citizen legislator. But honestly, I believe what William F. Buckley said, that he'd rather be represented by the first 100 people in the Boston phone book than, you know, the people sitting in Congress. When I meet people, like everybody here, I'd rather all of you were there than, say, the 20 senators from the northeast corner of our country. And the reason for that is we're interchangeable. You know, there's none of us who are kings. There's none of us who have a market on wisdom. And, you know, Hamilton, the big hit now on Broadway, has this wonderful song, this wonderful piece. I haven't been to it. I can't afford a ticket, but I've listened to the soundtrack. What about George Washington? And how they wanted him to stay. They said, don't go. He was revered and loved. He said, no, it's not, I've done my thing. It's time for me to walk away. And if George Washington can walk away, I think average, ordinary representatives and senators in Congress can walk away. We have term limits for the president. I think it's appropriate, and I think it would just help to break this logjam and get citizen representation going again. And at some point down the road, once campaign finance and education and all these problems are solved, you think we want to go back and get rid of them, that's fine. But I think for now, I've said I'll serve one term. And what I'll also do is help whoever wants to step up next after me. I'll campaign for them, I'll help them, I'll tell them everything I'll know, I'll give them the cookbook, and I think that would serve us all really well.
So one more policy question, then two strategy questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So we often hear Republican Senate candidates, senators, presidential candidates say that they want to repeal and replace Obamacare. What would your personal plan be for replacing?
There are several facets to this. We definitely need to completely repeal it. I mean, it has proven to be a huge job-killing, health-care-destroying behemoth that we thought it was. And we now have insurance companies going out of business. One thing we have to do, and I talked about this 4 years ago, is we need to remove the barriers to sell insurance across state lines. We need to allow for a whole lot of products to be created by a free market. The answer to any problem of an over-regulated, too expensive market that's not responsive to what consumers need. Let's face it, healthcare is a market like any other market. The answer is to free the market up and to have competition. And then you'll get better service, better products, and better prices. And that's what people need. And when we do that, we're going to remove things like one-size-fits-all healthcare plans that include all these things that people don't want. You have young, healthy people coming out of college in their 20s that don't need all these different services that older people need. And they want to get a basic, policy that'll cover them in case they go crash on their motorcycle. And that's good. We should have products like that. We shouldn't have people in our healthcare system forced to provide products that are against their faith or against their individual conscience. But if we had a functioning competitive market in healthcare, that's what would happen. And we need to do things like block grant Medicaid to the states. We need to bring things. Anytime you have a giant machine, whether it's Obamacare, whether it's Medicaid, the opportunities for fraud and abuse just get magnified exponentially, and that's what we have right now. So we need to bring it down, get rid of the bigness. In some ways, bigness is our enemy in America. Big corporate culture, big government, because there's so much less control and so much less responsiveness. We need markets to function.
Thank you. So this is now a two-part question. Going back to the 2012 race, your total percentage was 26%. Governor Romney was at 35%. So there's a 9% difference. How do you, why do you think that you ran behind the nominee at the top of the ticket? How do you think that you can change that in 2016? And regarding the geographic areas of the state, where do you feel that you'll run the strongest, the weakest, and where do you anticipate the battle will be next time?
This is a very different year than 2012. I didn't know the spread was as big as you mentioned. That's not good. I believe it was quite, I thought Romney did a little worse and then I did a little better, but it doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant because one big difference this year is the top of the ticket's going to be different. I think we're going to have a strong conservative at the top of the ticket. I'm a Trump person. I think it's going to be Donald Trump. But I'm an old friend of Ted Cruz. We were law school classmates. I don't have anything bad to say about him. He's super bright, conservative principles. I think Trump is the best person to take on Hillary Clinton, and we really have to keep our eye on that ball. She absolutely has to be defeated because I just think we are at the edge and headed off the cliff. I can't believe that Barack Obama was re-elected 4 years ago. I mean, we really snatched defeat from the jaws of victory 4 years ago, and we can't let that happen again. So I think we're going to have a much stronger ticket overall. I think also that this year, unlike 4 years ago, the level of anger and frustration about professional politicians in Washington is off the charts. People are so fed up and they really want to clean house. And they're, Chuck Schumer's the poster boy for that. I think I'm a lot wiser candidate now. You have to do something once to figure out kind of how it works. And I'd never done anything in politics myself until that first run for U.S. Senate 4 years ago. So I learned a lot. We're going to be much smarter now about using social media. I think also social media has really taken off in the last 4 years, even much more than in 2012. So it's easier, I think, this year to run a low-budget campaign and be much more effective and successful with it. So it's kind of a mix of all those. To answer your question about geography, there is no corner of New York State that I don't intend to campaign in. I think that this whole question of New York values that came up during the presidential debates, I think New York values are American values. Go to my website, which is wendylong.com, and watch my announcement video, and I take it on head on. New York values aren't liberal values. New York values are individualism and hard work and the pursuit of excellence and strong families and communities and generosity to our neighbors. I mean, those are New York values. So I absolutely reject the notion that Chuck Schumer represents New York values more than I do. I think New Yorkers across this state, in cities and in the country, I think they believe in the things I just talked about. And they don't believe in crony capitalism and just looking out for yourself, like Chuck Schumer does. I just don't think they believe in it. So I'm just going to take that message and take it all around the state.
And the last one, you kind of touched on it, concerning your last campaign. What, if you could point to one aspect, what would you do differently this time? And I think you touched on the social media or finances for the campaign.
I spent a lot of time in the last campaign just trying to raise money. And there's no point in doing that if all you're doing in raising money is to shove it out the door. I needed to focus on meeting people, communicating, doing social media. And so that's what I'm going to do this time. So I'm like Donald Trump in one way this time. So far I'm self-financing, but I hope by the end of it to be more like Bernie Sanders and to have lots and lots of $10 contributors. I don't want to be like Chuck Schumer and have big Wall Street.
Well, thank you very much for answering the prepared questions. So now we're going to open it up to Q&A from the general membership.
I had the privilege of listening to you earlier. I said I had the honor of listening to Mrs. Long speak at the conservative brunch earlier. Earlier you had touched on how important veterans affairs led this to myself. But my main question to you is right now the veterans affairs on September 3rd, 2015, there was an Inspector General's VA report that was released that cited 856,000. Okay, nobody knows what has happened to them as far as they were supposed to be getting the care that charges. Yourself is someone who is steeped in law. I would hope that you would agree that somewhere along the line someone needs to be held accountable legally for the crimes that they committed, and they are just that crimes. What I would like to know is when it comes to that in New York State, where do you feel that as a senator you could do and come in to help bring about change, at least in this state, being in the DAUS New York Senate? What could you do to help veterans within this state and potentially create something that can be replicated in other states for veterans across the nation?
Well, most of these policy changes have to be made at the federal level rather than the state level, and so I would be an advocate in the U.S. Senate. And by the way, thank you for your service. I said earlier in the Conservative Party that there's nothing any of us can do that can, in any way can compare to the service our veterans have given us. We owe them the free air that we breathe, and we can't do enough for them. So that's what makes the VA scandal just the worst kind of scandal, and criminal, as you said. So I would make it definitely a priority once I get in to see if there are any more investigations that need to be done, hold the executive branch accountable for prosecutions if those are necessary, and then, honestly, I'm not certain yet because I haven't studied enough, but I think we might just want to just get rid of the VA and give every veteran a card for them to select their own health care and not make them even be part of the system. Let them choose. Our government owes them their health care. And I think we owe them the health care they want rather than the health care that we decide to pigeonhole them into. And that way they will have the privilege and the ability and the right, really, to get the health care that they want.
Yeah. Wendy, thank you for coming today. It's great to be here. One of the things that bothers me most what's going on in Washington now is how Obama just seems to be going extra constitutional on everything. He just has these stars, and he has these, what do they call those? These like mandates that he signs, and just that's what everyone seems to want. And the thing that gets me so upset is the Republican Party doesn't seem Republicans in Congress seem to be standing up to him on anything. Not on the immigration thing, not on the Iran treaty thing, nothing. And now they have this Paris agreement about climate change going to cost us who knows how much, it's no good for anybody. How do you see yourself helping to lead the Republican Party within Congress to stand up to the president? Yes.
There have been a few efforts that I think should be greatly increased, and Senator Cruz has been in the forefront of many of those. Writing letters, getting senators to co-sign, members of Congress saying, this is unconstitutional. We object to this. We resent this. I mean, unfortunately, the Congress can't by itself shut the president down when he wants to take these extra constitutional actions. Some of them can be challenged in court. Some of them will be deemed by the courts to be what are called political questions, and they won't adjudicate. The best remedy for all of this is to elect a different president.
Right.
That's at the bottom line. That's what it is.
Right.
To the extent that some of these things can be dismantled legislatively, we need leaders to step up in Congress and make the intellectual arguments, and then start using political force to round up their colleagues and do things like overturning these extra constitutional. If they won't be overturned by courts, we need to take action to contravene them. And that's why we have the three branches. The founders knew that the branches would be in tension with one another, that they'd sometimes bat each other down, they'd undermine each other. The full force of Congress, a Congress that's properly and duly representing the people under the Constitution, needs to counteract those executive orders.
I had a question. What do you think New York State could do better to prevent the next 9/11 terrorist attack? What could we do better as a nation to prepare for that? Or what could New York State on a whole do better?
One thing is, it's interesting, but one of the things Senator Schumer prides himself on is bringing home the bacon for New York. And some of the people who don't really like him, when I talk to them, they say, gee, we'd love to vote for you, Wendy, but he brings home so much money and so many things we need here. Well, look what happened with New York's counterterrorism funding. The Obama administration cut it in half, and Chuck Schumer kind of stomped his foot and pitched a fit, but if he's so powerful and so good at getting things done and bringing home the bacon for New York, he couldn't even get our terror funding. So I just think it's a big myth that he's really doing this great job for New York. But to get back to your question, you know, the number one thing we need to do is rebuild a strong military. You know, our military has just been decimated. That is the number one job of the federal government. You know, education isn't the number one job of the federal government. Health care, all these other things. The number one job, Cicero said the safety of the people is the highest law. And that held true in classical times and holds true now. So we better put our eye on the ball of what the federal government's supposed to do. And that's number one, have a strong military. And when we have a strong military, nobody messes with us. You know, our friends are emboldened and they're confident, and our allies are pushed back. Right now, we have the opposite. Our friends are terrified. They don't trust us. They don't think we're going to help them. They don't think we can really help ourselves, and our enemies are emboldened. So we need to build up a strong military. And the second thing we have to do, and this is the politically incorrect part, and so you can make a note of this, and everyone's going to say, oh, she's a racist, she's a whatever. We need to start profiling and using human intelligence, you know, instead of all this electronic surveillance that's, you know, invading the rights of ordinary law-abiding Americans. We need to start being smart and using human intelligence and realizing that, you know, Granny coming through the security in the airport is not the one who's likely to be blowing up airplanes or self-detonating, you know, luggage bombs. So we need to have smarter intelligence and a stronger military.
Thank you for coming. You're really very well educated classes, and she's always nice to hear. You're a very intelligent person. Thank you. I'm curious about your views on unions and whether or not GOP is going to take, I guess, a different approach to unions. Historically, union membership is associated with strong middle class, and if you look at recent years, the decline in middle class was
I don't know if it's, I agree with you about unions, by the way. I mean, historically, I think unions are a private organization. And in America, we value private organizations. Unions should be a bulwark against government, and they should be a way that weaker citizens can band together for their interests. So I like the idea and role of the unions in America historically. Unfortunately, as with big government and big corporate America, what's happened is the unions have largely come to represent the leaders, you know, the kings of the unions. And the average worker, I think in many cases, is not being very well served by the unions. I'll give you one example of this. My building in Manhattan, you know, there's a building doorman and, you know, building workers union. Sometimes when those workers have some very legitimate grievances, they go to the union for help, they don't get any. Because you know what? The union is in with management, and they're in with all these other interests, and they're out for themselves more than they are for the workers. So I think there needs to be something done to get unions back to what their intended purpose is. And I think that the way to do that is competition. In other words, unions take their members for granted. You know, they collect their dues, and the members don't really get that much back in dues. So I think that there should be the ability not to join the union. And, you know, then the unions, I think, might respect their members more if they had to serve them well.
Do you have any plan to help save Social Security?
Yeah, well, the first thing is we need to stop raiding it. I mean, that it's outrageous that the federal government thinks that that money that doesn't belong to them, belongs to the workers who put it and saved it in the system, that's theirs to raid for other purposes. So we need to stop doing that. We need to get it off budget. And I am not one who is in favor of going back on the promises we've made to people who pay into the system. Just because we're running low on money and we're in a financial crisis. You know, that's the government's problem, not the workers' problem, not the people's problem. I do think what we need to do to get it on a sound footing is overall fiscal health. You know, segregate it, stop raiding it, get the rest of our budget in fiscal health, which means cutting spending and mainly getting an economy growing again. We need a growing economy. That will solve a lot of problems. And we've had an economy that's growing below